as well. We're sticking to the subject at hand today, which is the announcement Kevin started with, and anything pertaining to that. So, Kelly, when can we expect an outcome from the International Criminal Court, if any? What are the chances of dismantling this satanic institution, or is it going to be ongoing?
No, it's falling apart, like I said, but it needs the help of all of us to do that. We have to pull these misguided and possessed people who belong to this cult out. And once that starts happening, it starts a chain reaction. You can do that in your own community. Write to us, get our material, hand it to people going into the churches. Say, do not put money in the collection plate, because you're committing a crime when you do that, for one thing. What we find when you do that, it takes even just one person doing that, sends shockwaves through the local church. They call the police, they get all panicky. They alienate their own people in the pews by acting totally paranoid about this one person standing out handing a flyer. So you create a tsunami just by taking the one action. You start creating a tsunami, and all these tsunamis all over the world are joining up now. But it starts where you are. And so you have to answer your own question. You say, okay, how am I going to stop it in my community? And believe me, I travel around, I see the impact this is having. I see church attendance falling off. This stuff in the news about, what's happens to children at the hands of the church. Do you think any of that would be there if we hadn't have started this work in 1995? The whole genocide in Canada thing was brought up by a few of us. You have a tremendous impact, but you have to move from the static situation in your own personal life to acting, and then you start changing. You change. I like that quote from Sam Adams in the American Revolution. Somebody said, how did you make the revolution? He said, we didn't. The revolution made us. So as you take a step, you start getting changed by it, and you get stronger and more clear, and then you know what to do next. You can't just sit there and have a blueprint and say, well, okay, let's do this, or you do this for me, right? That's not the way things change, right?
So Annie has asked, I imagine that Kevin also has knowledge of how the church sacrileged sacred indigenous land grounds. Will they be held accountable legally?
No, they own the legal system. They're never going to be held. And the term accountable is a word put out there to keep everybody on the hook, to make it think, oh, these people are going to be brought to justice one day. Well, can you show me an example of that ever happening in their system? Never. It only happens when other people light a fire. And the whole purpose of the church going on to indigenous lands was to commit sacrilege. It was to violate that primary energy from nature, which is that all are equal, male and female are equal. We're one embodiment of the Creator. We're to share the land in peace. That's why we set up the Republic of Canada. We reached out to the traditional indigenous people and said, we're going to create a new arrangement now, outside Crown and Vatican jurisdiction altogether. And then you just read murderbydecree.com, you'll see how they went about doing that, because indigenous people were closer to the original understanding. The people who were harmed the most in these death camps they call residential schools were the children whose parents were spiritual elders. They had the sacred knowledge. They targeted people with the sacred knowledge, because then you end up drunk on the street and your culture falls apart when you lose the bond, from the sacred tradition. So anyway, hope that answered some of your questions. But write to me. We can talk more.
A few people have asked how they can contact you. What's your preferred method?
angelfire101@protonmail.com. I don't want to give my phone number because it'll get whacked, but I'll give you a backup email, hiddenfromhistory1@gmail.com, and through Shaun.
So Zachary, what does Kevin know about the mark of Cain in regards to the papal court?
Papal court, what curia means court in Latin. That's what the College of Cardinals call themselves. And to be a legitimate sovereign body, you need to be a court. And that's why they take that imaginary name for themselves. So by that, you mean the College of Cardinals, the mark of Cain. Yeah, they stand by the Orthodox teaching that all of us were marked by Cain, by his murder of his brother Abel. You're born damned, in other words. That's the ideology they need to implant on you to keep you ashamed and frightened and dependent on priests and putting money in the plate on Sunday.
Is the Vatican now compromised by US influence in an attempt to prolong US hegemony?
No, it's more like the other way around. All financial roads lead to Rome. That's why all the presidents go over there and pay homage. But the impression they created about this guy, Robert Prevost, is that, oh, he's an American, so America now has more influence. No, he's in among the College of Cardinals, he was called the second Latin American Pope after Bergoglio, because he did all his work there. All of his nefarious activities really started in Peru, Argentina, a strong link with Bergoglio and stuff we've talked about that he did there. So yeah, I think it's more like, Vatican running things.
What is the CCP connection?
Well, we did talk about this. The only country in the world where the government gets to appoint Catholic bishops and cardinals is China. And they actually have a joint committee with the church where it's like a joint church-state operation. With what's called the Chinese Communist Party. It's like the name of their government. So, I mean, we've talked about this, but that's kind of the general situation.
Lisa is curious whether the big-name Catholic apologists are paid to push false Catholic doctrines.
Not just paid, but I mean, there's an arrangement now with, I know this, having been a Protestant minister, when I started criticizing the World Council of Churches, which is the Protestant, it's kind of like the International Federation of Protestant Churches in the world, a lot of them. And they were pro-Vatican, openly. They renounced the traditional policy Protestant churches to call the Church of Rome Antichrist. That's done away with. They believe in ecumenism, which is all the churches getting together under the authority of Rome. They achieved that in England in 2010 at the Holyrood Agreement, when Queen Elizabeth violated her coronation oath and arranged to bring the Church of England back into the Church of Rome. So yeah, it's a whole convergence. Like I say, that's why people got to get out of this and move away in the other direction, on every level.
Why did Vatican finance solidarity movement in Poland in the 80s? That was what, Lech Wałęsa?
Yep, and Karol Wojtyła, the guy who you saw in the picture there, John Paul II, involved in these Ninth Circle activities. Number of reasons. The Reagan in the White House, his whole policy had kind of an anti-communist revival and a new revived arms race. If you remember back in the 80s, everyone was paranoid about being nuked. Maggie Thatcher and him reviving that whole 50s kind of mentality. And they needed the Catholic Church on board. The CIA was funding the solidarity movement through the Vatican Bank. And we talked about this last time. Pope John Paul II said, fine, but our condition is that you will now diplomatically recognize the Vatican, because America hadn't before 1982, And so thanks to Ronald Reagan, America moved into the Vatican camp, and it was a Cold War politics, but it was Vatican's axe to grind was that they were benefiting from it too by getting America into the loop.
All right, next question is from Tracy. What were you going to tell us last time about the Catholic Church hiding the fact that Jesus went to Japan, China, I think?
I don't quite remember that.
I don't remember that either.
Do you? I know I mentioned about Jesus going to India, which is fairly well documented. The Gnostics believe that. The Gnostic teachings had a lot of kind of Persian and Manichaean and Eastern dualism in their yin-yang kind of belief, but I don't remember about Japan.
So Sword wants to know, I see there was a guilty verdict rendered in 2013. Were any assets seized or defendants jailed? At
a local level. Based on that, the Catholic churches in Canada and the US were occupied and taken over by Native people on the ground, and their assets were seized. There was attempts to arrest Bergoglio, and on 2 occasions that almost worked. We almost got him in Geneva. But I mean, again, the only way to answer that question is to think, okay, how are we going to do it on our community? This is a ground up process. You seize the assets in your local community. The Indigenous people who are affiliated with our republic in Canada, the Squamish, Chilcotin, Cree and Anishinaabe, have all declared Catholic assets forfeited. So they have the right to go in and seize the money out of the collection plates under international law, under their own land law jurisdiction, take the buildings back, and arrest any Catholic priest because they're all part of this criminal conspiracy. So yeah, it happened, but locally, and it only happens in a bigger way if we get more people on board. This is a long process. It doesn't happen overnight.
Is the Vatican the largest bank in the world?
Yes.
Do you have an estimate on the assets?
It's in the trillions. We talked again about this last time, which you can go to the third show and look at that in more detail, but about 3/4 to 85% of the assets, all the bank deposits channel into the Vatican Bank. So you figure out, plus all the financial concordats taking your taxpayers' money into the Vatican Bank, all their corporate investments, it's enormous.
What do you think of the views of Father Malachi Martin, especially on the third secret of Fatima?
Call no one father but God in heaven, because he is the one father of us all. That's why I don't call anyone father. Just a little point there. I read some of Malachi's stuff. I don't really understand the third secret of Fatima. So, somebody in that will have to explain it to me, but I didn't really study that too much.
Do you expect to see results from the ICC when the Bible says Babylon will be destroyed by the stone made without human hands in Daniel?
Again, it's not ICC. That's the Corporate International Criminal Court. It's the ICLCJ. That's our common law court. Well, that's a bigger question. I mean, that has to do with what's the motive force here? Is it God or us or both? And I think it's both. The divine will operating through us to bring about justice and to save the lives of children here on Mother Earth. Let's not let religious dogma get in the way of doing that. Okay.
Okay. Is this part of the reveal of the white hat?
I've never met a white hat. I just keep hearing about them all the time, right? And it's funny to use the word hat, where these ideas come from. If somebody could trace who started this idea, white hat, black hat, the term "he wears different hats" refers to one guy putting on different costumes. So you might think about that. I don't think there's an elite group of people who have suddenly developed a conscience and are going to now save humanity. First of all, it allows us to sit back and let somebody else do it for us, which is always a fatal belief. And anyway, let's say a new group gets in, then they become the black hats. I mean, don't you learn anything from history? If we're ever going to change that, it means we got to forget about saviors and people doing it for us, and we've got to do it ourselves where we live and work. And that's what we keep coming back to all the time.
Does the Vatican control the John Birch Society?
I don't know. I have to look into that. Although, I think their money and tendrils extend everywhere, frankly, so it wouldn't surprise me. But I don't have specific info on that.
What about saying the Vatican had proof Jesus didn't die?
Yeah, that was from that archaeological dig we talked about that they commissioned in Cyprus in 1958, I believe, where they found archaeological evidence of the man Jesus and Mary going to the south of France to have their children, more than one. There wasn't just one bloodline of Jesus, according to that, despite what you see in the Da Vinci Code. Who knows? I mean, again, it's in the secret Vatican archives, and you have to get into that. Hopefully, in the course of the court's work, since we've already accessed one aspect of those secret archives about this log for the Ninth Circle, hopefully other things will open up. When you have a universal court order allowing you to go in there, then that's when you'll see it. And frankly, if we have the numbers, that's exactly what we're going to do in Rome. We're going to go in.
Are Catholic and Protestants the same network, same money network?
Yeah, they're all corporatized. I'm talking the mainstream churches. I'm not talking about some little church down the road operating by itself. There are a lot of those around. But I mean, those churches that have protected status they call it 501c3 in America, income tax exemption. That's how all the churches are controlled. And they're trustees of the state that was set up in Rome in 317. That's what the Roman Catholic Church is, the first corporation of the world. And so all of those tied into the state, yes, they're all part of the same problem.
What can Kevin say about Mormon and Catholic partnership? Can we hope the Mormon leaders lose power instead of growing?
Shaun, we got to do a whole show on the Mormon Catholic connection, because this is something I stumbled over a few years ago. I was invited to Salt Lake City, and we had to meet somewhere else, too dangerous. But the Catholics and the Mormons are like that financially. If you remember a few years ago, Bergoglio invited the whole Mormon leadership to open a Mormon cathedral in downtown Rome. Very weird, because the doctrine of each condemns the other, saying they're pagan cults, and yet there they are sitting down together. Well, there have been lawyers in America who've looked into this. The Mormon Church has enormous assets. It's probably the richest church after the Church of Rome. And the FBI and CIA recruit inordinately out of the Mormon Church, because I know this, I had a grandmother who was a non-practicing Mormon, and her grandfather was one of the heads of John Dunning. He was the, no, that's my other-in-law. Wait a minute. John Golding. He was one of the early bishops in Salt Lake City. So we have this within the family, a lot of these stories. The Mormon cult was like an early kind of social engineering project in mind control. And a lot of the early MK Ultra experiments were happening in Mormon churches and hospitals. Mind control experiments. The FBI and CIA recruit a lot of their agents as Mormons. And you notice they're all blonde-haired, blue-eyed, smiling, kind of Aryan types. The stories of these survivors who we have documented is unbelievable. It sounds like Ninth Circle, even worse, that go on in the catacombs beneath Salt Lake City. There's a tunnel system linking the main Catholic cathedral, which is just down the road from the temple, the Mormon temple. I can send you the links on my old radio show, Here We Stand, with the interviews of some of these Mormon survivors. So anyway, that we can only scratch the surface of that, but it's a whole topic in itself.